Today in Your Health, we look at a chronic problem among teenagers, a lack of sleep.
Your high schooler's chronically tired, right? Stays up late every night, surveys say close to midnight, finishing homework, texting friends, screen time, doing whatever teenagers do. And then has to get up early, typically 6:30 for school the next morning. Happens 5 days a week, with your teen getting more and more tired. She says the typical high school senior gets about 7 hours of sleep on school nights. And yet,
most studies that have been done have shown a fairly consistent 9.25-hour sleep requirement. So there's a huge gap between what they're getting on an average school night and what they require.
This probably sounds familiar to a lot of teenagers. I know it does for me. It is how many of us live every day during the school week, always feeling tired, under a constant fog, and under pressure from school, extracurricular activities, our families, and wanting to socialize with our friends. A good night for me is if I get 5 hours of sleep, which is pretty rare. It normally ranges between 2 to 4 hours of sleep each school night. While I am below average for the typical teenager in the amount of sleep that I receive, most teenagers do not get the amount of sleep that they need. According to sleep specialists and articles from the National Sleep Foundation and Dr. Emslem, a neurologist who runs the Center for Sleep and Weight Disorders, who spoke on National Public Radio, which is what I played at the beginning of this video, teenagers need at least 8.5 to 9.5 hours of sleep each night, 9.5 being the most recommended. It is averaged that most teenagers have around 7 hours of sleep a night, but I decided to find out what the average was for buff students. I conducted a survey in which I asked fellow students on average how many hours of sleep they received on a school night. Not only was it below the amount of sleep we are supposed to get, but it was even lower than the average most studies say teenagers have. I surveyed 31 students. Only 3 students got on average the recommended amount of sleep, which is between 8 to 9 hours, and just 4 obtained 7 hours. The vast majority of students, 21 in total, said that they receive on average between 5 to 6 hours of sleep, with 4 students getting 4 hours or less a night. This is clearly an issue if nearly all of the students at Buff are getting around at least 3 to 4 hours of sleep less than what they should be receiving. Which brings me to the point of my rant. I wish to propose that Buff Jesuit starting time be moved later in the day, to 9 or even 10 in the morning. If this happened, more students would get the amount of sleep they require, or at least reach closer to that number. It can easily be said, well, then teenagers should go to bed earlier so they can get the amount of sleep they need, and to dismiss it, but it isn't even close to being that simple. The issue lies far deeper than simply going to bed earlier. I will now play another part of the National Public Radio special, which will bring to light what I am talking about.
As teens progress through puberty, unprecedented growth in body and brain requires lots of sleep. And there's something else changing. The very brain chemical that makes one feel sleepy, melatonin, is released later and later in the evening as teens get older. Because of this shift, says sleep researcher Stephanie Crowley from Rush University, teenagers just don't feel sleepy till later at night.
So compared to, say, a 10-year-old, a 16 or 17-year-old might be able to stay awake later compared to a 10-year-old that will likely fall asleep on the couch watching TV.
Result, by the end of each school week, your average teenager has accrued as much as 5 to 10 hours of sleep debt.
See? I told you it wasn't that simple. Our biological clocks are winding us up to stay up later in the evening, which means waking up later in the morning. For many teenagers, 10 o'clock is just too early to go to bed because our bodies aren't tired yet, and waking up at 6 or 6:30 in the morning most definitely does not fit in our body's sleep-wake schedule. The National Sleep Foundation's article called How Much Sleep Do We Really Need words my point perfectly. Adolescents still need lots of sleep, at least 9 hours every night, and it is hard to get that much when biology says stay up late and school says start early. Making us live a schedule that is literally unnatural for our body instead of working with our biological needs is not only difficult for us, but is extremely unhealthy, not benefiting us in the least bit, and it is even dangerous. The same article claims that sleep deprivation is linked with increased risk of motor vehicle accidents, which is especially concerning since many buff students drive to school every day, weight gain or an increased appetite, increased risk for psychiatric conditions including depression and substance abuse, and a decreased ability to pay attention, react to signals, or remember new information. Brebeuf prides itself in being a college preparatory school and its students being highly intelligent young adults who are eager to learn and work hard in school. It may just be me, but it is rather difficult to stay focused during class when I feel like a zombie and am half asleep. Not getting enough sleep decreases our productivity and ability to remember and consolidate new information, which is the exact opposite of what Brebeuf wants and expects of us. An article titled Sleep in Teens, Biology and Behavior states, the problem emerges with titanic struggles to wake up in the morning, often failing and resulting in late or missed school. Another may simply feel sad and moody and blue, lacking initiative or motivation. Grades begin to suffer as the teen struggles to keep awake during class and while doing homework. Another may turn to heavier drugs to get some positive or arousing sensations. Many just struggle along in a kind of haze, never knowing how to feel or do their best. Our school clearly doesn't want these things to happen to its students, to us. Depression is a very serious and real outcome of sleep deprivation, along with grades slipping and many other bad things. If we are to do our best, then we cannot have these overwhelming issues burdened on our shoulders. While I have stated just some of the issues associated with sleep deprivation, I haven't mentioned any solutions. Well, luckily for you, I do have some, and they are rather simple. Brebeuf is notorious for its massive homework loads. I understand we are a preparatory school, but when students spend at least 2 to 3 hours a night on homework, it is just too much. According to a study conducted by Professor Harris Cooper of Duke University, there is little correlation between the amount of homework and achievement in elementary school and only a moderate correlation in middle school. Even in high school, homework does not correlate with higher test scores. Too much homework actually diminishes its effectiveness or it even becomes counterproductive. So while Brebeuf wants us to become successful and do well for the future, large amounts of homework are actually harmful. I think it would be a good idea if teachers could have map or document, if you will, that gives a list of all of the other teachers their students have. And it would tell when they went to class, and if it were on the computer, which it probably would be, then it could show how much homework is being assigned in each class and when tests and quizzes are scheduled. Not only would having less homework be beneficial to us, but also not cramming for several quizzes and tests that just so happen to be on the same day, making us sleep deprived and actually doing more poorly than what we could be doing. Also, like what I said in the beginning of my rant, the best way to help us with our sleep deprivation would be to actually work with our biological clocks, meaning that we would start the school day later, perhaps by an hour or two, which would result in it ending later as well. An issue I haven't raised about doing this, and the main reason why nearly all schools haven't changed their starting time, is that sports would have to be pushed back. I know that sports are extremely important to people and that they consume a big part of people's lives. The survey I gave out myself concluded that when I asked if students would want a later start time, most said no, the exact number being 20 students out of the 31 I surveyed. Most students commented or explained that the reason they would not want a later start time is because sports would last even longer. Sports play 7 days a week, or at least can for teams, and many teams practice every day for at least 1 to 2 hours. This is a lot of time to commit, which may actually be the problem. While I understand sports are important, our academics do come first, and even before that should be our health. I have a friend who has a game every single day this week, which is crazy in itself, but even more crazy considering this is a week before finals. The amount of time teams expect students to commit is insane. My solution for this would be that sports have students commit at most an hour to an hour and a half of practice every day, and that they are limited to playing 1 or 2 games a week. It is just too much to ask that students spend so many hours on sports and then work on hours of homework and be expected that we get enough sleep to perform well. If students were required to lessen the load a bit so that we could get an adequate amount of sleep each night, they would actually benefit not only ourselves individually, but our performance in school and in sports. There are so many things that Brebeuf could do to help us. The idea of starting school an hour or two later so that we can get more sleep isn't ludicrous. It is very well possible and obtainable, but only if our school is willing to work with us and our biological clocks. But it is not only fair for me to only place the burden on the school. It is also up to us to achieve this. Trust me when I say that a later start time would benefit all of us, and not just us, but our friends, teachers, and family. Please don't just dismiss this. Sleep deprivation is a very serious issue and it is affecting most of us. It is something we can no longer afford to ignore.